It was the blink of an eye for me, but for you it was a long time, or at least however long it took me to record the last video before you watched this one, or maybe you took a break between the last video and this one. I don't know. For me, nevertheless, it was a stop recording, start recording, and a new video. So, hi, long time no see. We left off having written our connection to our database, importing and using the MySQL library for Node and NPM. We wrote our own custom query function that's designed to promisify to give us a cleaner and easier to use syntax in the long run. And we've had some demonstrations of what some queries might look like. Just some basic ones for now. Let's keep talking about overall organization and a couple other issues we're kind of encountering along the way. So, again, you probably don't want to write queries in your endpoints directly. Like, I don't want to have to write up in this one up here, select star from to-dos. The chances of me needing that particular query in multiple locations, however complex it may be, is pretty high. So having what I like to refer to as the single source of truth for a get all to-dos query available in a file that I can import and use anywhere across my server code, I believe is important to have. All right, that single source of truth, what that function is. So let's see one way we can explore that option and that concept. Now, bear with me, as again, it's going to get complex like the routes folder nested structure. We're going to have a database index, and we could provide new files in here, but instead I'm going to choose to make a new folder called queries. For every table in my database, I'll probably have one file in my queries folder that corresponds to that particular bit of information, if you will. I don't have any users or things yet, so maybe we'll make one for users first so we can talk about registering new users to our database rather than having to go here and writing an insert statement by hand in our workbench. So what I'm going to be doing here is simply in our users file, simply say import the query function that we just made from up one into the index file. And again, I don't have to write index. It knows what I mean by look in the database folder directly, and by default, find the index file. I'm going to make one called const all, take no arguments, and here it's going to run that query file. It's going to simply say select star from users, where I don't have any. So for now, this is going to be our test. Describe users. So we're going to rename that to test for now. Okay, that's our one utility function. Again, this doesn't seem like a lot of usefulness at the moment, but bear with me. We're going to write export default and put test. And so if we import this particular file, we can import this object with a property called test. So I may import this somewhere. If I did as import, for example, I'm going to comment this, import to-dos from, whatever your path is, queries, to-dos. And then now I have to-dos.test as an available function. Very cool. But again, what if I'm inside of multiple subfolders and multiple routes? Well, writing something like that, that's fine, and I've done that in many a project, and it's totally cool, but it gets kind of nasty and ugly. So as a quality of life, watch this. I'm going to go back to my database index file where this query is and delete it from our last demonstration, which I forgot to push the code for that for the repository before I uploaded the video. Oh well, I'll just make a commit that says end of third and fourth videos. I don't think you'll know how to look past the previous commits. You're just going to look at my newest commit. What am I worried about? We're going to kind of do like a relay race type situation here. Rather than have to import I think I just realized I called this to-dos and not users, didn't I? Imagine it said import users from .. users, for example. My bad. We're going to take this object and as like a relay race, hand it off to my database index and export it yet again. So watch this. Import the users object from the queries folder and the users file, and take that and relay race. Now I can import this object anywhere I want across my application, and it will have db.users.test. So now anywhere I import this, my import will look cleaner, and I'll have all my available queries on it and ready to go. Again, this is not the be-all, end-all structure of keeping these things going, but it's a very nifty trick to learn early on to keep your code, again, scaling and compartmentalized. That single source of truth, I like to reference that so much. Well, Okay, I just realized my only router is the to-dos router. I have no users. I have no users endpoint, so let's go ahead and make one of those coming on up. I'm going to now, because I have this ready to go, I mean, we could test it somewhere, but let's actually build out our router real quick. Okay. So in my API folder, I might make a new file called users.ts. I'm going to go to my to-dos file and copy it and paste it here. So I copied my to-dos endpoints. I should leave all these in here, but I'm simply going to delete everything except for one of them. Change it to the test endpoint. I'm not going to need that here. I want the async and this stuff here. There we go. And watch this. I'm now going to choose to write import. I'll call it DB. Doesn't really matter what I call it with export default. I can make up whatever name I want, including class pizza. Import DB from up one out of API, up one out of routes, DB index. I now don't have to write one more step of queries/users. I can just say, give me all the queries from DB. And all the queries from DB are db.users. So now, because I'm inside this async callback function, I can write const test equals await db.users.test, execute that function, send that as that response, my good friend, and voila. That's all there is to it to run a query in your endpoint and make it look clean and professional and not hacky and half-assed. I made this new routing endpoint. I have yet to index it. I'm going to copy paste. I'm going to alt-click, which I believe is Option or might be alt-click on Mac. Essentially, it's placing a text cursor everywhere the word to-dos appear. I manually held Alt on Windows, might be Option on Mac, look it up. I can't remember the hotkey. And place a text cursor at all those to-dos, and now I simply change it to users, and look how fast I index that with a little copy, paste, and shortcut action. Super fast. Barely easy. Super easy. Barely an inconvenience. That's what I'm talking about. Let's head over to Postman and give this a whirl. My thing is running without any kind of errors, which is a nice change of pace. I'm going to make a new tab and open it here. It was a GET request to API user/test. How do we get there again for the uninitiated? Routes, no prefix. Routes index API. API index users. Users get test. Awesome. So new tab, localhost :3000 /API/users/test. I'll talk about your all-time backfires. Let's go look at what's happening. I know what happened. I know exactly what happened. Okay, so for those of you that are new, you probably have no clue what happened. And yes, I know it's, well, in my case, it's almost 10 at night and I'm drinking coffee. I'm a crazy person. I can't help it. I'm like Lorelai Gilmore. I'll have coffee any time of day and night. So I got a console log, but I didn't get a response because nothing returned here, unknown, and nothing happened. How do I know what's wrong? And if you were a newbie, how would you know what to diagnose? If your query doesn't throw an error, but is logging a response after testing, where did we last console log this response? Back in the original query function. So let's head there and see what I realized I forgot. I'm no longer just logging these responses. If there's an error, I'm rejecting with that error. So the try catch can catch the error and do something with it. A .then would, or a .catch would catch that error and do something with it. And if I'm chaining results together, then the .then should chain the next resolved set of results. Good times right there. So it just happened to work in the last video, so now I really know I'm going to get lit up in the comments. Don't go and say anything if y'all at this video and saw the mistake. Because I was console logging the values there, those .thens in the other example from the previous video were actually useless because I forgot to change those. I knew I was going to forget that. I'm like, don't forget to do reject resolve because you do that kind of all the time. And I did it anyway. Well, nevertheless, hopefully this little debug was a fun trip. Remember, we wrapped this in a promise to not have to just log the results from within, but rather kind of daisy chain them up, relay race them upwards into the promise syntax. So with that one little change, let's see what happens now with this await DB users. Back over here, click send. There's our response. And there is an array of these objects, which is our response we're expecting here in Postman. How cool is that? Very nifty. Okay, so clearly, the first thing we're going to have to know how to do is create a new user. And I'm debating, like, I would never, ever in a million years tell y'all to insert a plain text password into the database. So we're going to be brushing into some authentication and authorization and, well, security concepts here in just a moment, but I promise you it's very easy. Just bear with me. Okay, then. So how are we going to take something as simple as this and begin bumping it up? Let's go find out. I no longer need to look at this to-dos router because we're going to skip that for a while. I don't need this index.db anymore, this db index anymore, because we have the all users queries, no matter what we add to them, are exported. I've fixed my error. I don't need this routing index. I just need my API users endpoint to change these values and variables around, and I need my actual physical queries. I'm going to change this to, say, the insert query, or maybe register user, if that's what you want to call it. And we have to remind ourselves what is required when inserting a new user. ID is auto-incremented. Email is going to be required and unique. I need a first name. Actually, we left it as nullable, so we don't even need a first name and last name. We might keep it simple. First name, last name, a password, and created at is auto-generated. So email, first name, last name, and password. We have 4 properties we need to insert. Okay. You can also just come back over here and take a look at the users table itself, right? We can always go to our schema and say, all right, these 4 values. All right, got it. And even then, first name and last name are optional. So here we go. I need to pass into this thing the following statement. Insert into users, the following columns, email, first name, last name, and password. This is for visibility there. There we go. Values, and you might be thinking, but Luke, we're going to have to interpolate or string concatenate all these properties together. First off, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to tell y'all it is a huge no-no, even though I see plenty of examples online that still do it, even though you don't want to do it this way, including some of my old videos. So, learn this. Why would we not want to do the following? Let's say I passed in as arguments into this function an email as a string, the first name as a string, the last name as a string, and the password as a, not string this, I'm just kidding, it's still a string. As I'm passing in each function argument individually. I would have to come here and interpolate each one. But before I even finish this, I'm going to tell y'all doing this is not a good idea, because a would-be hacker could technically write a first name that looks like this. What if my first name that I filled out into your registration form looked like this? If my first name is first off allowed to be this, and then taken and added right here in place of this interpolation, what just happened? I cut off the insert statement, which will throw in an error. I don't give a crap if it throws an error, because then it's going to come over here and attempt to execute the next part of the query. Granted, this is not exactly how you would do it, but again, bear with me for the idea. I just injected some malicious query to blow up your users table. As a matter of fact, I want everyone at this point in time to go over to Google and look up Bobby Tables XKCD. There's always a relevant XKCD for any given thing. So by all means, look up the comic and now you'll appreciate the joke found within, and I'm not going to explain it to y'all. Well, this is called a SQL injection attack, and is actually a very common hack. There's actually a way around it. It's actually very simple, and it's actually built into the MySQL library we're already using. Remember that nifty values I told y'all not to worry about? Or we're going to worry about it now. I'm going to take this values argument, which is optional, And if it's there, I'm going to use them. Otherwise, I'm not going to bother. So if there's not there, it doesn't matter. If they are there, they're going to get placed right here in that pool. So after the query and before the callback. How does that help me, you might be wondering? Well, check it out. We know that allowing anyone direct access to our inputs and our SQLs, not a good idea. Big time. Instead, watch this. Let me fix my own query here. So here's our syntax. Insert into these columns, values. How do we placeholder those? Question marks, son. That's what I'm talking about. You want 4 question marks to correspond to these 4 columns in your insert statement. And now, on the outside of my query, as that second additional argument, I'm going to provide a comma. Sorry, this is kind of bumping on the edge of the screen here. Stop it. A comma with an array that can contain the escape values. It will kind of examine things in the array and go, this looks safe, this looks safe. And each thing in the array will, in order, get placed on each respective question mark. So this first question mark corresponds to email. So from my arguments list, I'll say the first question mark will be the email, the next one will be the first name, then the last name, and then the password. And there we go. That's all there is to it in order to write a safe insert statement using the escape placeholders or the escape values. My formatter just moved everything to a new line to make it more legible. Don't stress if yours doesn't look like mine. If yours just goes straight across the page and you like it that way, that's fine. Doesn't matter to me. But there you go. That's how you can write a safe statement. So anytime you have to have a dynamic value you pass in for the query to run, you need to utilize this escape syntax. And you're going to see me go through all the CRUD operations soon enough. Now that I have that, let's go and change this route. Now, this registration route, we could call it API users /post or register. I mean, that makes sense to me. We could also move it into another folder called auth for authentication. Let's just call it API. We'll call it router.post now. So remember, instead of get, we're doing a post. We could call this, it'd be API users post. We could also be intuitive and call it the register route or something like that. We can call it whatever you want. Again, pizza, it don't matter. Okay. Just like we were doing in the to-dos router scaffolding video where we took the rec body and made a new variable out of it, we're going to do the same thing here. That same idea of keeping our rec body only available in the networking layer or our router and using the variable that represents the rec body in our data layer with this function down here. So in db.users, I should now have an insert property that is expecting those individual arguments from this object. So I could say new user.email, new user. It's going to take a hot minute, isn't it? Dot first underscore name, new user dot last underscore name, and new user dot password. And there we go. Now we don't know what this response is be, so how about I call it the result? Now you can't call it res because res is already being used in the scope of this callback function, so we have to call it result. Maybe I can make the screen bigger this way. There we go. All right. Format, what happens? There we go. It just new lines all the arguments. So there's my insert and all the expected arguments. With TypeScript, you can always mouse over and look at the expected argument list. Don't worry about the promise unknown. We're going to cover that possibly in this or the next video. Okay. Now, what is result going to be when we insert something? I mean, I know what it is. Let's find out. Okay, so head to our router. It now became from test to register, from get to post. Everything else should be the same. Click on our body tab. We only have the express JSON middleware and nothing else. I now have to recreate each of those rec.body.email or new user.email. We're going to call it test@test.com. For the love of all that is holy, just be consistent here. Otherwise, you're going to run into a lot of trouble. I always use test@test.com, and I always use password123. So when I'm testing any project, that's my go-to login credentials. Last name, testing. Remember, double quotes are important on JSON. There we go. Let's fire this up and see what happens. Okay. First off, I'm going to copy this and place it in a comment in code. I copied the response from Postman. We're taking it to our code. so I can zoom in on it because it's that important. I want y'all to recognize what we're looking at. There is our result variable. Result is an object, and it has these properties that could or could not help you. So it would be result.fieldCount, result.affectedRows, result.insertID, server status, warning count, message, blah, 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 blah. The only ones you're really going to care about as a newbie are going to be affected rows to know if it worked or not. Because if you ran an insert statement or an update statement or a delete statement and it affected goose egg 0 rows, then you done messed up, Aaron. You forgot something because if it didn't affect anything, then your query didn't do jack. So you got to fix it. So an affected rows of 1 or more means I did it. Affected rows of 0, I didn't have an error, but I didn't do it. Insert ID will only help you on surprise. Insert statements. It will tell you what ID it just created. So if I register this person from a forum, it could automatically get this response from the server going, the server created ID 1. Head to the profile page for ID 1. A cool front-end trick. And you'll probably use changed rows for update statements, but you can use affected rows in the same way. So the most 2 important properties to be in mind would be these here. So if I had set up here const pizza, it would be pizza.insertID and pizza.affectedRows. So I'm talking about. We'll leave that comment here for now to reference it later, I'm sure. But there you go. That is a successful insert. How do we know it worked? We can head to our database and write the following query. Booyah! We got a test user, good to go. I know I toyed with the idea of blending in some authentication and security, but maybe not quite yet, not with the fundamentals going on right now. But storing a plain text password like this, if you're doing it, you're doing it wrong. I just want y'all to know that. So maybe we can go and find fake salt and hash password gen or something like that. I don't want to have to install and talk about what those libraries are. I mean, hold on. There we go. So we're just going to take this little dude. We'll do SHA-256 instead of SHA-1. Yeah. We're going to take SHA-256 and take this characters, which represent the password now. I went to passwordsgenerator.net, selected SHA-256, and then I copied the hash to the clipboard. I'm going to take that and actually replace this password, which we can do with update users set their password to be the following crypto hash, the SHA-256 algorithm, which is more realistic, where ID equals 1 execute. Data too long for password. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You know, like I said, it doesn't need to be real. It needs to be fake, so let's just lop off some characters until it works. Yay, okay, there we go. Why did I do that? Because, again, storing plain text passwords is never a good idea, ever in a billion years. You want to encrypt it somehow and then store it. So the lengths we just went to even do that in a testing environment shows how serious it can be if you let that slip into production, no matter how small your website is. You could accidentally expose somebody's credentials to the real world, which has been a common hack that has happened with SQL injections, bad responses from servers, sending people's passwords to the front end for some unknown reason, and then all of it going to hell. So that's why I'm taking these links now to make sure we don't even accidentally run into that step. So in the next video, I think we can actually finally take what we learned here and also run it to the to-dos table, right? That way we can take this user, since we have one now, and finally begin making to-dos. Remember, we had to do this. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these because we don't need to care about those. I'm going to take this and copy it and paste it to my schema.sql. So for the YouTube watchers that couldn't see or couldn't hear, you can have an example of what I wrote for my create privileges right there and whatnot. We're going to take what we did here and essentially crank out every single to-dos route for this one user. Because if you recall, our to-dos table had a user ID column that was a foreign key to the users table. And I told y'all you can't insert to-dos with fake IDs. But because I have a real ID now for a real user, I can foreign key and reference. I can now begin inserting to-dos. And from the last video now to this one, we're finally going to get into the meat and potatoes of crudding out our routes, right? I want to have a CRUD operation for my entire to-do table, and we're going to crank that out in the next video, so I'll see y'all there.